Wow, what a wild story. Can you imagine living in a neighborhood ruled by someone like Brenda? Let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from today? We love seeing our community grow from all around the world. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss tomorrow's special story. Trust me, you won't want to miss this one. See you in the next video. When my wife Lisa and I moved into our new home, we thought we were settling into the perfect neighborhood, a peaceful, well-maintained community where we could raise our son Nathan without worry. The houses were beautiful, the lawns were pristine, and the Homeowners Association, or HOA, was strict but seemingly well organized. It felt like a fresh start, but we had no idea what kind of nightmare we were walking into. Nathan, our 16-year-old son, was born with cerebral palsy. He's the kind of kid who never lets his condition define him. He's brilliant with computers, loves video games, and spends hours building things with his hands. His wheelchair doesn't stop him from living his life to the fullest. Unfortunately, not everyone in our new neighborhood saw him that way. Some people, like Brenda, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, saw Nathan as an inconvenience, and her son, Tyler, saw him as an easy target. It started small. The first week after we moved in, Tyler made a few offhanded comments when he saw Nathan outside. "Hey, speed racer," he sneered, smirking as he walked past. Nathan brushed it off. He had dealt with bullies before. But things escalated quickly. Tyler and his friends started making it a game. They'd bump into his wheelchair accidentally in the school hallways, forcing him to stop and regain his balance. They whispered cruel rumors, saying Nathan only got good grades because teachers felt bad for him. One day at lunch, Tyler stuck a wad of gum into Nathan's wheelchair wheels, clogging the mechanism and making it impossible to move. When Nathan struggled to push himself forward, Tyler laughed. "Guess it's time for an upgrade," he said. "Maybe your daddy can buy you some real legs." His friends erupted in laughter. Nathan never liked to make a big deal out of these things. He told us about it, but always downplayed how bad it was. "It's just stupid jokes," he'd say. But I saw the way his hands clenched into fists when he talked about it. I knew it was more than just words. When we reported the bullying to the school, they claimed they had a zero-tolerance policy, a joke in itself. Tyler was called into the office, given a meaningless warning, and sent right back to class. He walked out of that meeting with a smug grin, knowing full well he had nothing to worry about. And because he never faced real consequences, he kept pushing his limits, seeing just how much he could get away with. Meanwhile, Brenda made sure our lives at home weren't any easier. She slapped us with one HOA violation after another. First, for having a wheelchair ramp that didn't meet community aesthetics. Then, for supposedly leaving our trash cans out too long, even though we took them in the same day as everyone else. We were being targeted. Plain and simple. But at the time, we had no idea just how bad things were going to get. We were about to find out. That night, as I sat at the dinner table, watching Nathan wince every time he moved, something inside me snapped. His lip was busted, his knuckles scraped raw, and there was already a deep bruise forming along his ribs. He tried to downplay it, saying it wasn't a big deal. Not a big deal? My son had been attacked, twice, by the same kid who had spent months making his life miserable. And Brenda? She had the audacity to act like it was Nathan's fault for not fitting in. No, this wasn't going to happen again. I told Nathan to go inside and get cleaned up. Then, without another word, I grabbed my jacket and walked out the front door. I wasn't going to let this slide. Not this time. I didn't drive. I wanted them to hear me coming. Brenda's house sat at the end of the cul-de-sac, a massive McMansion with a pristine lawn, probably maintained with HOA funds. It was the kind of house built for people who wanted to impress but never earned real respect. I marched straight up the driveway and pounded on the door. Boom, boom, boom. A few seconds later, the door yanked open. Standing there, wearing a greasy tank top and sweatpants, was Greg, Brenda's arrogant, self-important husband. He squinted at me, already irritated. "The hell do you want?" I didn't blink. "We need to talk," Greg smirked. "Do we? 'Cause I don't remember inviting you over." I stepped forward, forcing him to either move or get run over. He moved. Tyler was sitting on the couch, a video game controller in his hand. The second he saw me, his face paled. Good. He knew exactly why I was here. I turned back to Greg. Your son and his friends beat up my kid today. Greg chuckled. You got proof? I stepped closer, my voice dangerously low. I don't need proof. My son came home covered in bruises. He doesn't lie. Your kid does. Greg snorted. Boys will be boys. Maybe your kid should grow a backbone. I felt my fingers curl into fists. The only reason this man was still standing was because I was choosing to let him. I turned to Tyler. Sit down. My voice was cold, commanding. It wasn't a request. Tyler froze. He didn't move, didn't even breathe. Greg smirked. You don't come into my house and... Before he could finish his sentence, I grabbed his collar and lifted him off the ground like he weighed nothing. He let out a choked gasp, his feet dangling an inch above the floor. Listen carefully, Greg. My voice was calm, controlled, deadly. I don't care how much of a tough guy you think you are. I don't care how many times you've weaseled your son out of trouble with fake apologies. That ends tonight. I let go. Greg stumbled backward, gasping for air. His face was red with humiliation. Just then, heels clicked against the tile floor, and there she was. Brenda. She strutted into the room like she owned the world, holding a glass of wine, her robe perfectly tied. She looked at me, then at her husband, still trying to recover, and she laughed. Laughed. Like this was all some kind of joke. Well, if it isn't our little neighborhood charity case. I turned my head slowly, my eyes locking onto hers. Excuse me? Brenda smirked, taking a slow sip of wine. You must be here about your little situation. Look, I get it. Your son's, you know, she waved a dismissive hand, fragile. But that's not our problem now, is it? She didn't realize how much danger she was in. She didn't understand that she had just crossed the line. I took a step forward. For the first time, Brenda took a step back. Her smirk faltering for just a second. But then, like the entitled queen she thought she was, she quickly recovered. She tilted her head, swirling the wine in her glass as if she had all the power in the world. You're not seriously blaming Tyler for your kid's problems, are you? She scoffed. I clenched my jaw. Tyler and his friends attacked my son. They knocked him to the ground, kicked him while he was down, and left him there. Brenda rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Kids' roughhouse. If your son can't handle that, maybe he shouldn't be around normal kids. My fingers curled into fists. I was 1 second away from losing every ounce of control I had left. But then, she pushed me over the edge. She smirked, took another sip of her wine, and said, maybe if you spent less time playing soldier and more time raising him right, he wouldn't be so weak. That was it. Before I even processed my actions, I ripped the wine glass straight out of her hand and hurled it across the room. It shattered against the wall. Red wine splattered across her pristine white walls, dripping down like blood from a fresh kill. Brenda gasped, stumbling backward. For the first time I saw it, fear. Greg lunged forward. You son of a... I turned sharply, pointing a single finger at him. Say, one more word. He froze, his mouth half open, too scared to finish his sentence. Brenda's confidence was shattered, but she still tried to salvage the situation. You can't do this, she screeched. You think you're some kind of hero? I leaned in, towering over her. No, Brenda, I think I'm not a fraud. Her eyes darted to Greg, but he had nothing. No fake bravado, no sarcastic remark, just pure humiliation. And then, as if the universe itself decided it was time, Richard's secret came crashing down. For years, Greg had strutted around like he was some decorated Navy SEAL, spinning war stories that never happened, wearing old SEAL t-shirts, expecting respect he never earned. And people believed him, because who would lie about serving? But I knew, and I was about to expose him in front of everyone. I did my research. I pulled military records. I checked SEAL databases. Greg had never made it past boot camp. And I wasn't just going to tell people. I was going to make sure they saw it with their own eyes. The perfect opportunity arrived with the Veterans Day fundraiser, a prestigious event where the town honored real service members. Greg, of course, showed up front and center, acting like he had earned a seat at the table. When the event host, a retired Marine colonel, asked veterans to stand, Greg stood up, puffing out his chest like a damn peacock. The colonel's eyes narrowed. Which SEAL team were you with? Greg hesitated, just for a second, but that was all it took. Team 4, he finally muttered. I smirked. Bullsh, the colonel nodded. Really? And what class? Greg froze. 81. Silence. The colonel leaned forward, his eyes sharp. That's funny, he said, because I trained SEAL Class 81. The entire room went dead quiet. I don't remember you, the colonel said flatly. Greg swallowed hard. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. That's when I stood up. Hey, Greg, I said, stretching my arms. Remind me, which phase of Budge was the hardest for you? His face twitched. He had no idea what I was talking about. His hands fidgeted. He glanced at Brenda, begging for help, but she was just as stunned as everyone else. I pulled out my phone and held it up. On the screen was an official response from my military records request. Greg's name wasn't there. Gasps filled the room. You never made it past boot camp, I said, my voice calm but deadly. The colonel turned to Greg. You lied about serving? The murmurs grew louder. Whispers turned into full-blown outrage. A real veteran stood up from his chair, arms crossed. Take off that SEAL cap, he growled. Greg's face burned red. He looked around the room, desperately searching for someone, anyone to back him up. But there was no one left. His hands trembled as he reached up, peeling the stolen Valor hat off his head. Humiliated, exposed. And Brenda? She sat completely frozen, her entire world crumbling in front of her. But this wasn't over. I wasn't just going to humiliate them. I was going to destroy everything they built. The fallout from Greg's humiliation was immediate. The moment he ripped off that stolen Valor SEAL cap, the respect he had built in the neighborhood vanished. People whispered, shook their heads in disgust. Veterans who once shook his hand now looked at him like he was dirt. And Brenda? She sat there, frozen, her usual smug expression gone. But I wasn't done. Exposing Greg was just the first strike. Now it was time to take down Brenda and everything she had built. For years, she had used the HOA like a personal weapon, bullying families, handing out unfair fines, and padding her own pockets with community funds. She thought she was untouchable. She thought nobody would ever dare challenge her. She was wrong. I had proof. Emails, bank records, financial reports. She had been stealing from the HOA, rigging votes, and illegally fining families she didn't like. But I needed to make everyone see it. At the next HOA meeting, I walked in with a folder full of evidence and a laptop connected to the projector screen. The room was packed. Residents who had put up with Brenda's nonsense for years. Some had been scared to speak out. Not anymore. Brenda walked in, still pretending she had control, still wearing her power blazer, still believing she could talk her way out of anything. She barely glanced at me, already looking irritated. Let's keep tonight's meeting brief, she said, flipping through her notes. We have a lot to discuss. I stood up. Actually, Brenda, we do. She sighed dramatically. If this is another complaint about... I pressed play. The projector flickered to life. The first slide. Bank transactions showing HOA funds mysteriously disappearing. Brenda's twitched. The next slide. Emails where she pressured vendors to overcharge for services. Then pocketed the extra money. Murmurs filled the room. The next slide. Footage from the clubhouse security cameras. Brenda accepting bribes from a contractor. Gasps. And finally, the nail in the coffin, a recording of Brenda mocking my disabled son. If they wanted the neighborhood to cater to them, she had said, laughing, maybe they should have picked a different place to live. Silence. Dead. Silence. Then chaos. You stole from us? A woman near the front gasped. You used HOA money for yourself? You mocked a disabled kid? Brenda's face turned white. Her mouth opened and closed, searching for a defense. But there wasn't one. She shot to her feet. This is taken out of context, she screeched. Nobody bought it. A board member stood up. I motioned to remove Brenda as HOA president immediately. All in favor? Every single hand shot into the air. Brenda was done. She slammed her hands on the table. You can't do this to me. I built this HOA. A voice from the back. No, Brenda, you stole from it. Laughter rippled through the room. Then security stepped in. 2 neighborhood volunteers, guys Brenda had once ignored like they were beneath her, now stood beside her. Time to go, Brenda. The entire room erupted in applause as she was escorted out. She shrieked, "I'll sue! I'll ruin all of you!" Nobody listened, because Brenda was done. By the end of the week, her name was stripped from HOA documents. By the end of the month, she and Greg were forced to sell their house. On the morning they moved out, the entire neighborhood watched. Brenda, hair a mess, angrily shoved boxes into a moving truck. Across the street, an older woman, one Brenda had fined countless times, called out, voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Need help packing, Brenda?" She smiled. "Oh, wait, you only like making people move." Laughter. Brenda whipped around, seething, but for once, she had nothing. Greg stomped to the truck, jaw clenched, face still red with humiliation. One of the veterans from the fundraiser stood nearby, arms crossed. "Not so tough now, are you, Seal?" he smirked. More laughter. Now, with everything packed, Brenda slammed the car door shut. Greg revved the engine, and the car wouldn't start. Someone in the crowd chuckled. "Looks like even your car doesn't support you anymore." More laughter. Brenda, fuming, smacked the dashboard. After a few more failed attempts, Greg cursed under his breath, yanked open the door, and stormed toward the moving truck. A minute later, the truck pulled away, towing their dead car behind it. As they disappeared down the street, I stood on my porch, arms crossed, not out of sympathy, not to say goodbye, but to make sure they were really gone. Nathan rolled up beside me, watching the truck fade into the distance. "They're really gone, huh?" I ruffled his hair, smiling. "They are. And they're never coming back." We've all seen people, like Brenda and Greg, entitled, power-hungry, and convinced they can get away with anything. But in the end, karma always comes around. What do you think about this story? Have you ever dealt with a nightmare HOA or an arrogant bully who thought they were untouchable? Maybe you've seen someone pretend to be something they're not, like Greg faking his military service. Tell us in the comments. Have you ever stood up to someone like this? Or maybe you've seen justice served in a way that was just as satisfying. We love hearing your stories. Also, what was your favorite moment from this takedown? Was it when Greg got exposed for stolen valor? Or when Brenda got kicked out of her own HOA? Let us know. And if you enjoy these stories of sweet revenge and entitled people getting what they deserve, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our next one. We post crazy HOA and Karen stories every day, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Drop a comment below, and let's talk.